Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into some really critical source material on leadership, missions, and the role of the local community in all of it. And our sources kick things off with a question that, honestly, it just stops you in your tracks. It asks, what if the greatest missionary breakthrough of the next decade isn't overseas at all, but is, and I'm quoting here, sitting quietly in your second row this Sunday?
That phrase really gets to the heart of it, doesn't
Yeah.
it? It captures this central paradox we're seeing in modern
That's
missions.
a paradox. How so?
Well, on one hand, the global church has never had more access, more mobility, more money. We're actually, we're really good at the logistics. We know how to support missionaries.
But there's a but coming.
There's a huge but.
Yeah.
We have failed, in many ways, at the most basic task of forming them. The research suggests we've built this incredible global machine, but we're trying to run it with people who haven't been spiritually or emotionally prepared for the reality of it all.
So it's like we have this massive global need colliding with local enthusiasm, but that enthusiasm, it isn't really sustainable readiness, is it?
Exactly. And that gap, the one between the need and the shallow preparation, it's being filled with what our sources call untested zeal. The passion is there,
Yeah.
for sure, but the intentional work of building character, it's just not.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack this central metaphor from the research, the greenhouse effect, and lay out the actual steps needed to cultivate people who are resilient, rooted, and wisely sent.
Hmm.
Let's start with the data, because you said effectiveness is uneven, but some of these numbers are, they're pretty jarring.
They really are. And we have to face it. Studies are showing that somewhere between 20 and 50% of missionaries leave the field early.
50%.
Up to 50%. And just think about the cost of that, not just the money, but the human cost, the burnout, the broken families. It's just devastating.
Wow. Half of them might come home early. I think most of us assume that when that happens, it's because of, war or sickness or some big external event.
Right. But the sources say that's not the main driver.
So what is?
It's primarily internal. Things like inadequate preparation, spiritual immaturity, and what they call significant relational fragility. The core mistake is that we've confused deployment. The big church service where we send them off with development, the slow, hard work of shaping a person's character.
That sounds like the urgency trap. The need feels so big, so immediate, that urgency just pushes discernment right out of the way.
It absolutely does. We start to value speed and charisma over, actual proven endurance. We send people because they're passionate, not because they have what the sources call tested character, which can only be built over time in a community.
And that leads right into this other idea in the research, the private calling myth, this assumption that a call to ministry is just sort of this private thing between you and God.
Right, and that idea is, well, it's biblically tenuous at best. The New Testament almost always portrays vocation as a communal thing. An internal feeling is part of it, sure, but it's not enough on its own.
You're talking about something like Acts 13.
Exactly. Look at Barnabas and Saul. They weren't just sent because they felt like it. The church in Antioch prayed, they fasted, they discerned together before sending them out.
So the community acts as the filter. It's the validation mechanism.
Precisely. Missions has to be reframed as ecclesial obedience. It's obedience rooted in the whole community, not just an individual's feeling. And that's actually a protection for the missionary, because when they're struggling, they know the whole community is still behind them, still responsible for them.
I really like that reframing. And it brings us right to the main analogy here, the greenhouse model. The sources argue that a church shouldn't just be a funding mechanism, writing checks, or what they call a launch pad for random shots in the dark.
Right. It should be a greenhouse.
An intentional greenhouse.
Exactly. A greenhouse isn't a factory. It doesn't force growth. It just creates the perfect controlled conditions so that growth becomes, well, almost inevitable. It nurtures a person until they're strong enough to survive in the harsher climate outside.
So for you listening, what exactly does this greenhouse regulate? What are those conditions?
The sources outline 4 key things. First is discernment. That means the leaders are actively looking for spiritual gifts and maturity long before anyone even mentions missions.
Okay, so discernment first.
Second is testing. You put potential leaders in controlled ministry situations where you can see how they handle real but limited pressure.
And the third and fourth?
Third is mentorship, real focused guidance. The sources actually suggest a specific time frame, like a 6-month mentoring journey to focus on character and theology. And finally, accountability. building structures that don't just stop the second they get on a plane.
I have to ask, though, with all this focus on slowness, on process, isn't there a risk we become too cautious, that we miss opportunities because we're waiting for perfection?
That's a fair question. But the sources argue the risk of sending someone too early is far, far greater than the risk of sending them wisely, even if it takes longer. Wisdom is actually faster in the long run than raw zeal.
Right, because of that 50% attrition rate.
Exactly. You avoid the burnout. You avoid the failure. It's about longevity, not just a quick launch.
And that intentionality really highlights the two extremes the sources warn against.
Yes. On one side, you've got the spontaneous volunteers. They're driven by emotion, they're sent too fast, and they often struggle when the initial excitement wears off.
And on the other side, you have the deeply embedded leaders. These are the most capable people, the ones who are rarely ever sent at all.
Right. Because of what the research calls the stay-at-home bias.
Explain that.
It's an organizational fear. It's
Yeah.
not theological. Leaders look at their best people and they calculate the cost of losing them, the hole in the budget, the programs that might suffer.
So they're basically hoarding talent to keep their own organization running smoothly.
They are. And it's a huge hidden price. By clinging to its best people, a church actually stunts its own health and its global impact. It chooses internal preservation over external obedience.
And this is happening at a time when the demands on missionaries are higher than they've ever been.
Exactly. Cross-cultural work today demands incredible emotional maturity, theological depth. The margin for error is razor thin, and the sources give a really stark warning here. They say churches that fail to do this intentional cultivation will end up sending fewer, weaker, and less supported workers, or none at all.
Which means the elders, the local leadership, have to see their role differently. They're not just administrators.
They have to be spiritual stewards. Their job is to recognize grace and test character. The whole question has to shift from who wants to leave to the much more proactive question, whom is God already shaping in our midst?
So let's walk through that practical pathway. The sources lay out a framework that moves us beyond just gut instinct. It starts with a phase they call observation.
Right. And this is all about leaders actively watching for faithfulness and teachability over time. Not just one big impressive moment, but consistency in the small things. How do they handle conflict at work? How do they show up for a simple task?
Faithfulness in the small stuff.
If you see that, you have a foundation, which leads to the second phase, invitation.
And this is a huge shift. Instead of waiting for someone to apply, the church proactively invites them into this process based on what they've already seen.
And that invitation is so powerful. It's the community saying, we see what God is doing in you. It grounds their calling in something bigger than just a private feeling.
Okay, so that invitation leads into the third phase, which is testing. This is the crucible.
Correct. And it's designed to test three specific things. First, doctrinal soundness. Truth is the anchor when everything else is chaos. Second, resilience under trial.
And these aren't necessarily dramatic trials, right?
No, usually they're mundane. How do they handle a project failing? Or unfair criticism? Or just delays? The sources mention Moses' 40 years in Midian as a kind of pruning, a hidden mercy to refine his motives. You need to know that disappointment won't completely derail them.
And the third dimension of testing.
Humility and a teachable spirit. Because giftedness without humility is a recipe for disaster, especially in a new culture where you know nothing.
So after they pass through that testing, they move to the final phase, confirmation.
And this is where it goes from an individual assessment to a plural leadership agreement. You need elder affirmation, peer endorsement, and congregational recognition, just like in Acts 13.
And the sources are very clear that this final commissioning isn't just a ceremony.
No, it has to be a covenant.
A covenant, meaning?
Mutual vows. The church promises long-term spiritual covering and accountability. The missionary promises to remain accountable to them. It means ongoing pastoral oversight, even from thousands of miles away, to handle burnout, conflict, and doubt. They're still part of the body.
This has been incredibly insightful. So if we zoom all the way back out and look at this whole greenhouse framework, so what does this all mean?
I think it means the local church can recover its confidence as God's primary place for forming leaders. It's a shift from, just sending checks to sending people. The focus becomes the slow, patient cultivation of the future fruit you can't even see yet, the person sitting in that second row.
So by releasing its best, the church's strength isn't diminished, it's multiplied.
That's the key. Because the movements they start are rooted in wisdom, not just zeal. They last.
And it all starts with just being ready to see the potential. Which leaves a final question for you to think about long after this deep dive is over. If God is already preparing a missionary in your church right now, would your current way of doing things recognize that work, or would you unintentionally restrain it?